Thank you so much, Rose, Aaron, and Sierra. My name is Maeve O'Rourke. I am so excited to be joined once again with Jake Muller on the official broadcast desk, and welcome to the Knoxville Regional Championships. Jake, I think they had some really excellent points on that couch. Justin's going to be sending out that Gothitelle and the Fluttermane right out of the gate, and it is Palafin and Iron Hands here for Leonard.
I really like this lead from Justin just because the Fluttermane is so threatening right off the bat, especially given that Gothitelle into Palafin, pretty rough because there's no flip turn. The Palafin has to stay on the field, and it cannot switch out to activate that 0 to hero transformation. It's a bit of a rough start for Leonard there, just because this Palafin will be forced to stay in its 0 form for now. And
that's huge with open team sheets, right? That's a big part of open team sheets. You can say, oh, I can easily bring in my Shadow Tag Pokemon because the only thing you can do is send in these Pokemon. You can't switch them around. Looks like there is a Terra right out of the gate here, though. That is going to be an early commitment to it onto this Palafin. It is Terra Water. It is holding Mystic Water. It is going to still do a lot of damage to anything it hits, even if it is not in that hero form with that boosted attack stat. And I think it's incredibly cute still in this form. Fake out from the Gothitelle into the Iron Hands will prevent it from doing anything this turn. Dazzling Gleam will do a really good chunk to both of these Pokemon here, but Palafin with the Wave Crash, not having that hero form, is still committing to doing a lot of damage on this turn. Into the Fluttermane is enough for the knockout as well. You're going to take a lot in recoil, though, and that might mean that this Palafin isn't able to hang on for too long after maybe switching out and switching back in.
Well, I mean, it still doesn't have the option to switch out, but that is a very big knockout. Fluttermane is such a threat, especially to this Iron Hands on Leonard's team, that having that out of the way means that the Iron Hands, well, it was safer until the Great Tusk came in, and it no longer has the option to Terra into that Grass type. So it's going to probably get knocked out by something like an Earthquake or a Headlong Rush this turn, but that big knockout onto Fluttermane, really nice for Leonard just because he gets something out of the Palafin, which he may not have otherwise. You know, the Palafin's stuck in a really rough spot. Leonard recognizing that if I want this Palafin to do something, I probably have to just take a KO with it turn 1. Eliminating Fluttermane is really nice. It just means that Palafin gets some damage out. But this Great Tusk comes in a really strong spot, and it looks like only the Palafin has Protect, so the Iron Hands may not be able to stick around one more turn.
Yeah, Palafin is going to be protecting this turn, trying to not take any damage from the opposite side with this Earthquake. Earthquake is going to do that super effective damage onto the Iron Hands as well, because it is no longer able to terrestrialize. It is going to take probably that knockout here, so Iron Hands is going to get knocked out. You could bring in Pelipper, you have access to Jet Punch. There is no Focus Sash on that Great Tusk because it is Life Orb. Yep. So that may have been a knockout that Leonard wanted to take, even though now Gothitelle is going to eat its own Citrus Berry, took some damage from its partner's Earthquake, is going to go for Psychic, but of course with that Protect, not going to happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, the Palafin does have the option to Jet Punch something this turn, especially given the Pelippers possibly coming in. Even a Terra Water Wave Crash could be enough to knock out the Gothitelle in the rain. But unfortunately, the Palafin is certainly at a spot where one Psychic will knock it out. So if you do happen to Jet Punch into a Protect on the Great Tusk, that would most likely lead to the Palafin's demise. Looks like we may see the Moongus come here, though, which I respect just because it protects that Palafin a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Protect on the Great Tusk, right? Gothitelle does not have it.
Right.
So you at least know that you're not having to make a call on Protect on Gothitelle, but Gothitelle could still go for something like a Thunder Wave if it wanted to. It does have a couple of options here, but it also has Psychic, which is still super effective into Amoonguss. Amoonguss also can't terrestrialize, but Amoonguss is bulky. Amoonguss is going to be something that Justin has to kind of power through a little bit here because you've lost a big Pokemon, a big attacker like Fluttermane. Yeah,
the Amoonguss cannot terrestrialize, and the Great Tusk could, but if it did, it would still be a ground type and weak to that Jet Punch, so that's not an option for Justin defensively on this turn. It's going to be an interesting choice here just because if the Jet Punch does connect into that Great Tusk and we see something like a Rage Powder from the Amoonguss, this Palafin will still be in a very, very strong spot.
There is a great Terra here, though. Yes. A huge defensive Terra with this Grass Terrestrialization on this Gothitelle, just putting itself out in a much more comfortable position in front of this Amoonguss. Protect from the Great Tusk, not trying to take something like a Jet Punch from this Palafin, which is where it targeted this turn. Amoonguss is possibly going to try and go for something like a Spore here, but it's not going to connect if it goes on that Gothitelle. Psychic into the Palafin easily enough to get that knockout here. Gothitelle is putting in so much work by preventing that Palafin from being able to switch around comfortably, and is going to make this endgame a lot more comfortable for Justin Carris. Pollen Puff will be super effective damage, doesn't do a lot though, and the last Pokemon here that Leonard has in the back is Pelipper, which I'm going to be honest is not necessarily known for its offensive prowess.
It's not. It actually matches up pretty well into this Great Tusk. Both the Hydro Pump and the Hurricane should knock it out from this range, but that was such a heads-up play from Justin. That was a like very close to unpunishable play with that Terra Grass, just because you make sure the Great Tusk doesn't get knocked out by a Jet Punch. The Terra Grass ensures that your Psychic will connect with the Palafin. Like the worst possible thing that could have happened would be like a Wave Crash and Pollen Puff into the Gothitelle, but even then Wave Crash would certainly not have knocked out this Terra Grass Gothitelle from this range. We saw the Pollen Puff do a small amount of damage, but that, like, making sure that the Palafin got knocked out that turn was so big because now the Great Tusk doesn't have to fear it anymore.
Yeah, looking like here, if you're paying attention to Leonard's screen, he timed out because he only had one Pokemon left to pick in. Yeah. So he was just taking all of that time to think, right? Pelipper coming in is going to set up this rain. The Pelipper is actually, you know, still going to be, I think, doing a lot of damage. It's got the Focus Sash, so it's going to take 2 hits. It cannot be Headlong Rushed. It cannot be Earthquaked. So you can only hit it with a close combat, which is what this Great Tusk is going for. Does 50% of that damage. It will take a defense and special defense drop, though, which could be tough to deal with if you're taking something like a Hydro Pump or a Hurricane. Hurricane's great into either of these Pokemon, into this Gothitelle. It's going to be super effective damage, easily enough for that knockout. Is going to force Justin to reveal that last Pokemon that he has on his team, so you are at least getting some information if you aren't able to wrap the win here. But I think you're in a pretty good spot because Spore is going to put that Great Tusk to sleep and is now at that -1 level of special defense and defense. I think
if the Iron Bundle comes in here for Justin, I think there's a world where Leonard can still possibly win, just because you do have the Rage Powder option that will make sure that the Amoonguss, the Pelipper doesn't get hit by a Freeze Dry this turn. And I believe Amoonguss could possibly take 2 Freeze Dries if it's holding that Citrus Berry, which I believe it is. So I think it's very possible that Leonard could still win this, because you could possibly just Rage Powder away some attacks. You know, the Great Tusk has to stay asleep this turn, so you could take the opportunity to make sure you knock it out and make sure that you're not attacking into a possible Protect with that Hurricane. But this could be a huge turn for Leonard here.
Yeah, Protect on that Iron Bundle, not trying to take any damage. Great Tusk takes that mandatory first turn of sleep here. Is going to have a chance to wake up, but it's going for the Hurricane into that Great Tusk. It is enough to get the knockout as well, especially thanks to those drops in that defense and special defense. And this allows for possibly a side Pollen Puff. No, Leaf Storm is shown as the move here as well into that Iron Bundle. Is going to be a great way to try and deal some damage, I think, later on.
That's huge. The Leaf Storm actually makes that play a lot more simple, just because even if the Iron Bundle does Freeze Dry that Pelipper, it does get knocked out by the Leaf Storm, and there's no chance the Great Tusk could have knocked out the Amoonguss with 1 hit, unless it was possibly a critical hit. But the Leaf Storm, even at -2, should have been able to knock out the Great Tusk with a -1 special defense. I don't know, that turn with the Palafin knockout on the Terra Grass was pretty rough, and 1 Hurricane even enough to knock out the Iron Bundle. It looked a little bit rough for Leonard there, but that Pelipper actually coming in very clutch. Just because that Hurricane was so big. The Iron Bundle special defense, not known to be the greatest, and so Leonard possibly knowing that Iron Bundle is typically pretty good against this team that could very possibly be in the back for Justin, and if it is this Pelipper, it could very well be what I need to close out this game.
That was a really, really interesting game 1, right? Because you thought Leonard losing some big offensive threats in the back. He was still comfortable in the front. He was still comfortable with his 2 Pokemon in the back. There was a lot. I think the Leaf Storm on Amoonguss really changes that. Justin Carris had so many heads-up plays in there. He had a lot of really smart plays, a lot of great options, I think. I think he just wasn't able to close out the game because that Amoonguss is just such a problem to deal with. And you don't have ways to hit it and do enough damage. Amoonguss can truly just sit around and become one of the more annoying Pokemon you have to face.
Well, I think that's a great example of a change that Leonard made to this team paying off very well, because Gavin did not have Leaf Storm on that team when he went to Oceania. And that Leaf Storm was really huge there, just because it allowed them to close out the game with that Leaf Storm. So just a really great option from Leonard there, and I would be willing to see that we'll see something similar come out in Game 2, just because, you know, even though we did see the Palafin really not be able to do exactly what we want it to do, you know, we didn't see it able to switch out thanks to that Shadow Tag, but it still got that huge KO to Fluttermane, which could have been a big issue later on in the game. And like suboptimal conditions for Leonard still led to a win. So if Leonard's able to position slightly better, even just get the Palafin able to switch out and back in, it could be a bit more smooth sailing, but I know that Justin still has some options too.
I think the Gothitelle lead though is still so smart. I think that's a lead you really need to probably lead with again in Game 2, because it does shut down a lot of what Leonard wants to do with his team, and it forces him to play on the back foot right out of the gate. I just don't know if Great Tusk is the Pokemon that you want to bring, because it does lose to a lot of the Pokemon on Leonard's team, right?
Yeah.
Great. I mean, it feels really safe, but when you don't even have the opportunity to terastallize it and take away its fighting typing, then you're taking that super effective damage from something like a Hurricane, and that already kind of puts you at that disadvantage, especially when you're holding that Life Orb and you are not holding that Focus Sash, right? You're not going to be able to take 2 hits. Oftentimes you run that Focus Sash just to help with those drops, but looking here into our Game 2 lead, it is Gothitelle and Fluttermane once again, and Palafin and Amoonguss this turn.
A nice mix-up there from Leonard. I think the Amoonguss is a little bit better than the Iron Hands here in this lead scenario, just because you have the option to Rage Powder something away. You could possibly Spore. You still, unfortunately, don't have to worry about the Taunt on Gothitelle. Taunt is very, very nice on Gothitelle just because it shuts down Amoonguss really well. Unfortunately, it doesn't shut down Pollen Puff, so that's still an option into healing the Pollen Puff, but Palafin's still stuck in the same scenario where it is stuck on the field, cannot activate that 0 to hero to transform into hero form, and will possibly have to go for something like that same Terra Water Jet Crash, or Wave Punch, and the Terra Water Wave Crash if it wants to get a bunch of damage off.
Really interesting too here, right? Because you may force a Terastallization on the opposite side of the field, but no Terastallizations this turn just to protect from this Palafin. The Fluttermane going for that Dazzling Gleam. Again, this did damage to both of these Pokemon, but now Palafin able to stay a little bit healthier at the start of this game, and Amoonguss tanks that so well. Gothitelle going for the taunt onto the Amoonguss, a very pretty obvious play this turn 1. You're not dealing with a fake out either. Amoonguss knew that, goes for the Pollen Puff this turn. Super effective damage into the Gothitelle, whether it was Terastallized or not. So a pretty safe play, I think, turn 1.
Yeah, I agree. It's just smart, safe play from Leonard there. Make sure the Palafin doesn't take too much damage. You're not going to get baited by the taunt and fail a Spore, because if you protect and Spore that turn, you get nothing done, while Justin gets a bit of progress on the Amoonguss, but more importantly the taunt. But the Palafin still, I mean, we did just see it opt to go for the Terra Water Jet Punch. I'm curious to see if it's able to knock out Fluttermane, because I know that Terra Water Jet Punch can be very strong. It is boosted by that Mystic Water item, and Fluttermane doesn't have the best defense. But a lot of Fluttermane are trained to be very bulky these days, so I wouldn't be surprised to see it be able to eat, one of these Jet Punches.
I think you also learn a lot by letting that Fluttermane lock into something with these choice specs as well. It didn't lock into Thunderbolt, which it has the opportunity to carry. However, Gothitelle's going to switch out here. It's going to bring in the Iron Bundle, the fastest Pokemon currently in the game, in these 12 Pokemon on the field. Quark Drive showing that it is a speed boosting booster energy as well. This thing is moving incredibly fast. You've got a Terastallization here though from Leonard's side of the field. Going to be that Palafin once again, is going to be that Terra Water, has the Mystic Water as well as the item. It's going to be still doing a lot of damage, and it can probably handle some damage just because it's not taking, maybe as much on turn 2. Going for a Jet Punch this turn though, from this turn into this Fluttermane, it only does about 50%, so it's not enough to do that full knockout. Dazzling Gleam though does bring this Palafin to under 50%. Pollen Puff, great way when you're taunted to help heal up your teammates, and you have the opportunity to switch next turn.
You do have the opportunity to switch now. That's really big for Leonard, because now the Palafin is able to switch out, activate that 0 to hero, which is really huge for it, and then when it comes back in, it's going to have those very strong Jet Punches. The Jet Punch we saw barely do half to the Fluttermane. I think that's indicative of the training on Justin's end there. But the Pollen Puff, they're just very smart. There's no need to try and predict what might switch in or out on the other side and go for Leaf Storm. That Pollen Puff makes sure that the Dazzling Gleam damage is healed right back up on the Palafin.
Yeah, Pelipper comes in here. It is going to set the rain, help out its partner in the back. It also now gives you some access to some moves that may force that that Iron Bundle to change who it's targeting, right? But it looks like Iron Bundle is going to be your Terastallization of choice. The Ice typing here is going to be a great way to put on some pressure with some Freeze Blast, possibly with some Icy Winds. You get that additional boost to the damage. Freeze Dry is going to be targeting down into what was that into the Amoonguss actually there. Is going to be enough to get a knockout, which is pretty huge, because now you have this Pelipper who, even though it got in without taking that much damage, it's still going to take a Dazzling Gleam from this Fluttermane who wasn't knocked out, and it brings it down to its Focus Sash. So Fluttermane staying on the field, I think, is pretty huge right now for Justin.
That is a lot of damage for Justin, and a very good turn too, just because that Terra Ice ensured the KO on the Amoonguss, which likely would have survived one Freeze Dry from that range and been able to heal up with the Citrus Berry, and probably survived that Dazzling Gleam as well. So the damage boost from that Terastallization makes sure that Amoonguss gets knocked out. The Pelipper will go down to one more single attack. We do have to worry about Jet Punch now. The Jet Punch surely knocks out the Fluttermane from here. The Iron Bundle will be able to stomach one, but you do have to worry about this Palafin now, just because it's still pretty healthy. You have to worry about calling a potential no fear attack with the Pelipper again, like Leonard did in the last round. and this Jet Punch going to clear out the Fluttermane, it looks like.
Yeah, Fluttermane at least off the field, so that's one of the Pokemon that does damage to both sides on the opposite side of the field, but an Icy Wind feels very safe here from this Iron Bundle, but it goes for the strong Freeze Dry this turn, targeting down into that Palafin with that boost. It's not enough to knock out. It hangs on 2 HP. Pelipper with the Hurricane here as well into that Iron Bundle. It is not enough to knock out either. It does get the confusion though. Really great training from these trainers, I think, on both sides.
Wow, that's a turn. That Hurricane clearly was a damage roll from that first game because it was able to score the one-hit knockout. That's really good information for both players. That is a huge survival from that Palafin, though, just because that allows it to stick around one more turn. And Jet Punch obviously will be able to knock out the bundle from here. Possibly even the Gothitelle, the Mystic Water, Terra Water, Jet Punch in the rain is nice. But that is the Palafin being still on the field here is just so big because that means that Leonard is not down to his last 2 Pokemon, one of them being at 1 HP. And the Iron Hands in the back is still looking like a pretty solid option for sure.
Iron Bundle switching out here. With this Gothitelle on the field, you now have some Faker pressure on Pokemon with 2 HP and 1 HP respectively. Tyranitar is going to come in though, and that is going to set up some chip damage on both of these Water-type Pokemon. Palafin protecting this turn means not going to get any offensive output whatsoever for the rest of this game. Gothitelle's Fake Out targeted into the Palafin, but that is such a smart switch from Justin to allow to get a double knockout without doing a whole lot. This Hydro Pump to the Gothitelle doesn't even do enough to bring it down into the red. So a great play here, I think, from Justin.
That was so good. We didn't know that the Tyranitar was in the back, and clearly Leonard didn't either. Did not expect it. Just because that Tyranitar switch again means that even though you did no damage this turn, you take 2 knockouts with the Sand. The Palafin and the Pelipper both go down to 1 tick of Sand damage. So now it's just going to be down to this Iron Hands in the back, which, matches up very well into Tyranitar. There's a very, very small maybe chance that Iron Hands can clutch this out, but between the Gothitelle Psychic and the Terra Ice Iron Bundles, Freeze Dries, I doubt the Iron Hands will be able to take out like a 1v3 situation here. That's just such a smart switch though, because you know that the 2 Pokemon can't switch out. So switching in Tyranitar, setting up the Sand, 100% guarantees that both the Palafin and the Pelipper get knocked out on that turn, so you guarantee a 3v1 advantage on this last turn.
Yeah, I think that's a really great adjustment for Justin to have made. It definitely, I think, forces Leonard on the back foot in terms of adjustments for a Game 3 that could possibly come out here. The moves on this Iron Hands, one of them is Wild Charge, so every time you do damage, you're taking damage. And that is tough in a 3v1 scenario, especially when there are Pokemon that can do super effective damage. This Low Kick does a good chunk as well. Psychic as well. You're moving slowest on the field out of all of those Pokemon. Iron Hands is probably not going to be able to handle another turn of that. This Wild Charge into the Gothitelle, not even enough to get that knockout either. So I think that is going to be probably lights out on this game too. And these trainers now get, I think, an additional turn to just plan for a Game 3.
I think even bringing Tyranitar to this match is kind of bold if you're Justin. Especially if you're considering Palafin and Pelipper being 2 of the biggest damage dealers, being water types. If you're not terastallizing the Tyranitar, it doesn't have a great way to hit the Amoonguss because you don't have that flying type Terra Blast. I think it's very risky because obviously Iron Hand is one of the best answers to Tyranitar that hasn't terastallized. But knowing that the Focus Sash is a really big component of that Pelipper, knowing that possibly you're going to very, very closely miss KOs like we saw with that Palafin and the Freeze Dry, that Sand damage is really what the Tyranitar was there for, and it did its job beautifully. So a very bold decision from Justin, but a very, very smart one because it paid off in dividends here.
One thing that I think that's interesting, right, is Tyranitar also doesn't feel like the safest pick because it's holding Assault Vest.
Right.
And you are facing down a team of big physical attackers.
True. Yep.
In Dragonite, Baxcalibur, Palafin and Iron Hands. Palipper.
Palafin.
Yeah, Palafin.
Palipper.
It's fine. But you are facing down a lot of big physical attackers on Leonard's team. It is a very smart call to bring for a situation like that, where if you just chip these Pokemon down, you know you're facing something with a Focus Sash. You know Leonard is really good with mechanics, so you know he's going to train his Pokemon to handle a lot of big hits.
Yep.
But you're still putting yourself in that position. Here's my thought, right? If you bring Tyranitar, do you bring Baxcalibur as a counter and just have some priority damage, because that Tyranitar is Terra Flying. So an Ice Shard is going to do, an Ice School Spear is still going to do a lot of damage to it. But is that a big call you have to make? Does that feel too much of a overcall?
I don't know. I think the Baxcalibur is kind of a fine bring here. There's nothing on the team that, I guess Great Tusk can knock out Baxcalibur regardless of if it's terastallized or not, because there's that Terra Poison type. But I mean, looking at the rest of the team, I don't think it matches up too poorly into everything, and it would be great to have something that could smack the Tyranitar even after it is terrestrialized, possibly. But it looks like we're going to see Leonard stick to that lead from that second game with the Palafin Amoonguss, not sticking with what won him that first game, but possibly opting to maybe play with the Tyranitar in mind more early on.
Yeah, and I think that probably, you saw how defensively he was protecting his Palafin in game 2. Still was, you know, it was a huge way to kind of try and mitigate some damage here. However, it looks like Gothitelle Fluttermane, the same leads here from Justin, whereas Leonard is bringing the same lead from his game 2 with that Amoonguss and Palafin.
Yeah, I mean, we did see this same exact lead about 20 minutes ago, not even 20 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago in that game 2. But it's interesting to see, there's so many different options here because the Protect on the Palafin, to make sure it doesn't take something like a huge Moonblast or Shadow Ball or a Thunderbolt, like you said, is an option on this Fluttermane. And the Taunt option on Gothitelle is still there. This Amoonguss doesn't have a whole lot to do if it's expecting to get taunted on this first turn, providing you're protecting that Palafin. But we have seen Leonard go for some pretty bold plays, like with that Pelipper in that first game. Like we're going to see another one here with a Terra Water Wave Crash if he does up to locking those moves.
Yeah, I mean, you saw right for Leonard that he got the win by getting rid of that Fluttermane early.
Yep.
And I think that's a call he's going to try and make again this game. He goes for the Terrestrialization on turn 1. Terra Water Palafin, 0 form, even though to me it is still a 100 in my heart. Palafin with that Mystic Water still does so much damage. We saw how much that Wave Crash was, but the Thunderbolt this turn with that Choice Specs, it's enough to get the one-hit knockout. And that is a huge call for Justin to make. And those open team sheet formats, you have baited Leonard 2 games in a row, and you have gone for the Thunderbolt this turn. A huge play, plus the Gothitelle going for the taunt here. Amazing turn 1 play for Carris.
And that sort of the Pollen Puff into nothing is so sad.
Oh man, that hurts a little bit for sure.
Justin just called Leonard out on those plays. He's noticed that Leonard has been making some more aggressive plays with his Palafin, with his Pelipper, and he's saying that you also realizing on turn 1 in last game, Amoonguss did not Rage Powder. It went for a Pollen Puff, like it just did in this turn as well. So recognizing that you probably don't have to worry about a Rage Powder this turn because of the threat of the taunt or the Fake Out from the Gothitelle, and just like he did game 1, Leonard went for attack with the Palafin right away, and Justin called that out and punished it. And now Leonard is without his Terrestrialization for the rest of this game.
Yeah, and it didn't even get to get a single move off,
No.
right? Fluttermane switching out here does bring in this Tyranitar. You still have super effective damage with that Psychic on the Gothitelle from either side. You also now, if there's a Rock Slide, there's a way, is a saying that we will say forever. Psychic onto the Amoonguss does a good amount of damage as well. Super effective damage. Wild Charge from the Iron Hands into that Gothitelle does under 50%. It will take some chip damage to probably bring it down to that Citrus Berry range. Pollen Puff into its partner Pokemon, the Iron Hands here, just to boost up some of that damage from that Wild Charge recoil there.
I like the Tyranitar switch in. Like, you don't really need Tyranitar to be healthy, especially now that the sand is up. It's going to be able to break that Focus Sash as soon as the Pelipper comes in. But the Psychic into Amoonguss is great. I think he recognized that the Pollen Puff into Iron Hands was a pretty safe play. And now that you get a bunch of damage on Amoonguss, you get rid of its Citrus Berry. It's still taunted, so you don't have to worry about any spores. You've seen that Tyranitar and Gothitelle are both faster than Iron Hands. This is such a strong position for Justin now. He can just start firing off attacks, which are pretty much guaranteed damage because there's no switches, there's no protects, there's still a taunt on the Amoonguss. It's a really tough spot for Leonard to be in here.
I mean, he has access to the Leaf Storm, right? Which does do super effective damage, but then I could see Justin going for the Terra Flying here, which is probably what he's going for on this Tyranitar. Having the Terra Blast of Terra Flying to attack into that Amoonguss is a great way to handle what is a really tough threat to deal with. And by not bringing this Tyranitar game 1, you were not putting out a good check for the Amoonguss. So having the opportunity now to go for something like a Terra Blast with that Flying Terra type into the Amoonguss, or even into the Iron Hands for super effective damage, is going to be a great way to handle it, and that is enough to get the Amoonguss off of the field. It is now Iron Hands and then the Pelipper, but we saw Pelipper take it back in game 1. Gothitelle's Psychic into this Iron Hands with that fighting type still does a pretty good chunk of damage, even though Iron Hands is pretty bulky here. Volt Switch into the Gothitelle, a great opportunity, I think, to try and set up another Fake Out in those next coming turns, bring in the Pelipper, you get the weather change, but Justin still has the Pokemon advantage here. He can easily switch in, switch out.
Yeah, I did misspeak because the Pelipper will not be, its Focus Sash will not be broken because it has set up the rain for itself. But should the Tyranitar switch in and come back out, that is when we will see the Focus Sash be broken, even if it's not broken by the Psychic already. And seeing a Tyranitar swap here, I think would be very smart for Justin, just to reset that weather, to make sure it doesn't take a Fake Out or a Wild Charge or anything like that. And still, like, there's not a whole lot of huge offense left for Leonard here. Like, he's got to be very careful about when he lets his Pokemon take damage, because once they do take damage, it's going to stick. There's no more Pollen Puff, there's no more Citrus Berries, and it's going to be very tough for Leonard to recover from big damage here like this one.
That Rock Slide does a huge amount of damage. A Fake Out into the Gothitelle to stop at this turn, and you know, I think it's going to be nice. Probably the Gothitelle could also have swapped out, you know, just because of Shadow Tag, it could have swapped out and then had Fake Out opportunity again, and then you could swap out the Tyranitar and allow for that last Pokemon to come in, and then reveal your other Pokemon. I think Justin doesn't have to worry too much about hiding information now that we're in Game 3.
Right. I also understand not switching just because he most likely has an Iron Bundle in the back again, which will have that booster energy. Will still be faster than both Pelipper and Iron Hands in the Tailwind. So no need to, you know, possibly switch, maybe get caught with a Wild Charge into Iron Bundle on a swap or something like that. Just taking the safe route here, making sure that he's not overthinking this win.
Yeah, some big damage at least to get that Gothitelle off of the field. You also put a Hurricane out, but you didn't get the Confusion, which I think Leonard desperately needed there. This Terra Blast from the Tyranitar into the Iron Hand, super effective damage, brings it down into the red. Is not enough to get the knockout here, but these Pokemon are both sitting very low, and I think an Icy Wind is going to be able to handle either one of them, or a Dazzling Gleam at this point as well.
Yeah, Icy Wind, Freeze Dry, Terra Blast, like any single attack should be able to take a knockout here. That booster energy does activate, making sure to boost that speed thanks to Quark Drive. Now the Iron Bundle still will be the fastest thing, cannot be eclipsed in Tailwind by either of these Pokemon. We should be able to see Justin kind of clean up the game from here.
Yeah, I think a really smart play, right? Protect is a pretty safe option, right? Because you're forcing the targets into the Tyranitar, who once again can click Rock Slide. Hurricane is going into the Protect this turn, though. Not going to try and get a Confusion on that Tyranitar. Wild Charge into the Tyranitar as well. Thanks to that Terra Flying is enough to get that single knockout. You've now brought Justin down to his last two Pokemon. It is 2-on-2, but the Pokemon on Leonard's side are not nearly as healthy at this point in the game. Iron Hands hangs on with 3 HP, and so if you you know, you can't knock that out anymore with a Sand Chip at this point. But I think Flutter Mane, as long as you can maybe stall out some of the Protect if you're a little worried about it, but if you're the Iron Hands, you can't even go for a Wild Charge.
Yeah, a Wild Charge will knock out the Iron Hands at this point. It's going to be rough for, it's still pretty rough for Leonard here. I believe the Iron Bundle still will be faster, and even if the Pelipper does opt to attack the Iron Bundle with a Hurricane, should it outspeed, the Flutter Mane just Dazzling Gleams and the game ends. like a single Dazzling Gleam going off here ends the game. A single Freeze Dry going off should end it too, just based on the remaining resources on either side. But there's that Freeze Dry to knock out the Iron Hands.
I think you need a Hurricane Confusion on this Flutter Mane right now. I think that is truly your end game, wrap, right? Hurricane into the Flutter Mane, you get the Confusion, so that is part of your end game opportunity here. Then you have to rely on getting the knockout with or Confusion possibly, but even then I think you're still taking a Freeze Dry, but you do hit yourself in Confusion, right? I don't know.
It does hit itself in Confusion, but the Iron Bundle is still going to be faster than Pelipper. One Freeze Dry will clean up the Pelipper from here. So
I mean, unless you hope that Justin clicks Hydro Pump and
or
goes for
maybe he Freeze Dries his own Flutter Mane.
Yeah, but no, Freeze Dry here to wrap up, right? These players are not going to be fooling around like I am, and that is a great win for Justin Carris in a really tight best of 3 that I think had a lot of great reads and turn calls from both of these trainers.
Yeah, that was such a great match. I think all 3 games we saw some really big plays from both players, especially that turn 1 Terra